Kentico as a product, but also what you can do with it. In this case, Brian is going to be doing an interesting kind of more of a technical deep dive. We've had a variety of different topics, and I would encourage everyone, when you have a moment, go out to KenticoUserGroup.org, take a look. We have a session planned already for September by Avistone Technologies. They're our next speaker. Virgil Carroll from HiMonkey will be speaking in October. We're skipping November because of the Kentico Connections events, and then December we're actually going to have someone from Kentico doing an overview of the Kentico 9, the new release of Kentico that's coming out at the end of the year. So that's your intro into what the Kentico User Group is all about. I'm going to turn it over to Brian. You're in great hands. He is a genuinely nice guy, but he's also a great speaker, and he's also a Kentico MVP. So, Brian, it is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Joel, and welcome everyone. My name is Brian McKeiver. I am, as Joel said, a Kentico MVP and co-owner of BizStream. We're a Kentico Gold partner, just like Joel is at HiMonkey. And like he said, today we're going to be talking about Kentico EMS API Deep Dive. Now, this is a fairly technical topic, so I'll just throw that out there right away. I'm going to try to make it easy to understand, but if you don't understand anything, feel free to save your questions and ask them at the end. We are going to have some time for that to go over questions. But really, you know, my goal is to talk to you and give you some familiarity with the API, with what Kentico can do, and hopefully give you some value for your time that you spend with me today. So thanks for spending the time with me, and we're going to get started because there's a lot to cover, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So with that, let's get the party started. You know, as Joel mentioned, the Kentico User Group is a nice group that's been started about a year ago by HiMonkey, and I just want to say thanks to them for asking me to speak and present at one of their sessions. You know, they have a lot of people from around the country that attend, and even in their office. And if you haven't been there yet, please check out the link at KenticoUserGroup.org, like Joel mentioned. And you know, just thanks again, guys, for asking me. So hopefully you find this valuable. We're going to get into it after you know, that start. So today's goals really are summed up in 3 different methods, and the familiarity with online marketing API is something that I don't think a lot of Kentico developers necessarily have in their normal everyday tool belt. It's something that, as we talk to many different Kentico developers, they're using a lot of custom web parts, a lot of the regular API, a lot of modules, but they're not really branching out into some of the more advanced digital marketing concepts. And you know, hopefully I can show you that there's nothing to be afraid of. It is pretty easy. We're going to go through it, and you know, at the end of it, you'll be a little bit more comfortable. And the good thing is about the Kentico API, as you probably well know, it's a very familiar API. The patterns that are in place apply across the system. It doesn't matter where you're using it, whether you're working with a custom table item or a module class or activity tracking or content personalization. The way you use the API is all the same. That's one of the reasons we really like Kentico. We like the fact that it's very solid, and you know, the API is very good. It's structured well. It makes sense as opposed to some other APIs that we've used in the past. So that's the first goal, is to just get a little bit more used to that API and show you some usage of it. You know, next, anytime we talk about Kentico and the framework itself, I always tell my developers at BizStream plus other people that I train, don't work around it, work within it. And by that I mean, if you use the API and you use the info providers and generate items of data in the correct way with it, the whole system works. Content staging will work, web farm sync will work, and it's using the tool. But if you generate a lot of external code that's not using the API, like you make your own data access class or you use entity framework, you're kind of working around Kentico and not necessarily using it to its fullest. And when you use something like an entity framework, Kentico doesn't know about it. So there's challenges that you're injecting, and you're actually making your job harder as opposed to using the API as it's meant to be. So work within it, don't work around it. And then lastly, I'm hoping today to show you some tips for how to make the online marketing platform perform even faster. I've got a good walkthrough. We're going to see a slow example and then how to optimize it, make it faster. Because This is very true in Kentico. There are many ways to do things. With any enterprise platform, there's always many ways, but some of those ways are simple, out of the box, really quick to do, and they do their job when you don't have a lot of data or when you have a very simple scenario. But there's other ways that if you learn and use, that no matter if there's 10,000 rows of data or even maybe 100,000 rows in certain areas, that the system will still perform just fine. And frequently we get asked about, why is it slow or how to make this faster? So I'm going to give you some tips to take away today to hopefully educate you, and you can use them in your daily practices. So those are my goals for the webinar. And of course, with goals, there's some assumptions that we should make as well. Like I said, this is a technical webinar. I'm assuming you've got some experience with C#. If you don't, time to learn because this is a technical webinar. I'm also assuming you've actually used the Kentico API before. So I'm not going to go over like the super basics of what the really core pieces of the API are. Like, I'm not going to sit here and type using cms.webanalytics or using cms.online marketing. I'm assuming you've done that before and you've got some experience with the API. Most Kentico developers do, but I'd just like to point that out. If you don't, maybe come back to the recording a little bit later or listen anyways, and I'll do my best to explain it. And then lastly, from an assumption standpoint, a lot of the Kentico API uses this pattern of an info provider and an info object. And everywhere in the system, whether it's a style sheet, a user, a custom table, a page, you have this consistent pattern. So I'm assuming that you do know that. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. If you do have questions, feel free to follow up at the end with the question and answer session or email me. But those assumptions I'm making, and I think it's a fair set of assumptions. So this isn't a 101 webinar. This is more like a 201 webinar. And the topic, the main thing we're talking about is the Kentico Online Marketing feature set. So I thought I would start by quickly reviewing what that comes with. And like I said, sometimes people haven't been using this as much. They have EMS, they have the enterprise solution, but they're kind of waiting for their marketing team to maybe tell them what to do next. And hopefully after you see some of the things I'm going to tell you today, you'll be able to maybe take that first step and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to turn on activity tracking and show the marketing team how we can do content personalization, or show them how we can measure the impact of what's happening on our site. So these 8 items are kind of the core way that Kentico describes the feature set of online marketing. And I like to think of them as building blocks. I talk to people in terms of each block kind of builds on top of one another. And the very lowest level of online marketing is web analytics and activity tracking in terms of the context or the visitors of your site. It starts with those 2 low levels, and then it builds once you know what's going on, once you can measure and see the behavior of what's happening on your website. Then you can take that information and you can personalize. You can have a landing page or a homepage item that is personal to someone based off where they're coming from in the country or the world, or you can personalize it to their job title or the fact that they've put an item in the shopping cart. That ability is all just kind of drag and drop, plug and play in Kentico. And we're going to go over how to maybe automate some of those things in terms of that. So, I'm not going to go through each one of these points. Just know that Kentico can do lead scoring. It can do A/B testing. It can handle email marketing, marketing automation. We are going to talk about today. But there's a lot that it does. And if you don't know, definitely reach out to your Kentico sales rep. Reach out to any other Kentico partner you may work with. So what we're going to focus on today, though, is actually these 6 items, because I only have roughly an hour, so I couldn't hit everything. But I'm going to go through some examples that touch these items. We're going to talk about how do we generate some of these things automatically, how do we optimize some of these things. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into the first one, the first feature set that we're going to look at from an API standpoint, which is, well, actually, I'll get there in a second. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. The first thing I do want you to know, anytime that you customize Kentico and use the API, you want to do it in a safe way that isolates your customization away from the core platform of Kentico. And to do that, there's some pretty consistent ways that you can handle isolating the code into certain areas or certain namespaces that when you run a hotfix or when you run a patch or an upgrade, your stuff is going to be safe away from what the upgrade might overwrite. So I'm going to show you today how to do that. It actually starts with anytime you have a lot of custom C#, you should be kind of placing that in a custom class. And to tell the Kentico system that you have a custom class, you can use this register custom class attribute on top of all your namespaces. And really, that's the thing that connects your C# file to the system of Kentico. It makes it aware, and when the application starts up, it searches through all your class files and it finds anything that's tagged with the 1 or 2 methods that you can register a custom class, and then you can choose it in the user interface of Kentico. So it's smart and it reflects through, it finds all those points of customization, and when you're building out a workflow or an online marketing process or a macro condition, your namespace, your code will show up as a, oh yeah, we know about this, it's safe to use, it's totally available to use in certain areas of the system. So the first thing is registering your classes in the correct way using that attribute right there. And if you want a full example, I provide a link at the bottom of my blog for where you can go to register custom classes. It's pretty easy, and most developers have probably seen this, so nothing earth-shattering, but that's the first place to start. And don't think that you can just write any C# you want and Kentico will know about it. You have to register into the system, and that's how you do it. The first feature set that I want to get into, though, is web analytics. And that's really the basis, the first building block of where Kentico Online Marketing Solution starts. There are a lot of built-in analytics. It can handle charting, graphing, metrics of reports. One of the nice things I like about web analytics is you can subscribe to any report or chart in the system, and the system will email you that content. So you don't have to remember to log in every time that you look at web analytics. It will push you information weekly, daily, monthly, however you want, in terms of the basics of the in-the-box web analytics. You know, things like page views, browser visits, file downloads, and one of my personal favorites is actually the 404 not found report. That one we actually, in most of our customers' websites, we have the main content person subscribe to each week or month, and then we can get a report of any bad links they have in their site or other people that are linking to bad pages. So it's kind of a neat little system. It's the Kentico Analytics that we are talking about, though. Don't be confused with Google Analytics or any other analytic platform. There's the built-in one that we're going to talk about today, but do know that the full recommendation is to still run Google Analytics as well as Kentico, because they both track different things in different ways, and Google is a really good tool. It's free. There's no reason not to use it. So how do we customize, or what do we do when we need to do something special in terms of web analytics? The first thing I want to talk about is actually kind of a best practice that isn't all that well known, and luckily in the newer versions of Kentico, in version 8, version 9, and higher, this is turned on by default. But I thought I would start with a tip for anyone that is using an older version of Kentico, and mainly this speaks to Kentico 7, because there's still quite a bit of users out there who use Kentico 7. But in the 17-point hotfix and higher, there's a new setting that was added that says log analytics with JavaScript. And what this does is it changes it from a server-side execution to a client-side execution. And it helps determine if a client that's requesting the page that you're tracking analytics on, and that client is not a real person, it's a bot, it's a spider, it's a spam thing, and they leave the page before it even loads, that might throw off server-side tracking. But with client-side JavaScript tracking, it'll know. It won't fire that request because the page isn't finished loading far enough along in the DOM loading process to know. So there's a quick tip. You know, that's in the settings. It's a simple checkbox that you just say check log via JavaScript, and it's going to help you get a little bit more accurate statistics out of your web analytics. And like I said, in version 8, it's actually totally on by default. You don't have to do anything if you're using 8 and you didn't know about this. It's already being as accurate as it can. So there's something I thought I would start out with. But when it comes to working with the API, because that's our topic today, API deep dive, there's a few things to realize. Just like any other part of the Kentico API, you start with the top level namespace of the module or the component of the system that you're looking for. And CMS.WebAnalytics is the one API that you most likely will start from anytime that you have to do anything with setting up a custom conversion or setting up a tracking mechanism that's not in the box with Kentico, because Kentico has many of them, but there are valid use cases where it might not do exactly what you want. So I'm illustrating here, there's in the CMS Web Analytics API, there's two main things that you would, or two main methods, sorry, not things, that you would use the most, and we've used these frequently at our company. Log conversions is the first one, and log hits is the second one. And they're very close. You know, sometimes just looking at a page could be considered a conversion, but their meaning or use is for two different parts of Kentico. Log hit is the basic one. It just takes standard activities or actions like a page view or a file download and allows you to add into the analytics hits table every time that action happens. And if you look behind some of the get file scripts in Kentico's pages, you'll see log hit kind of all over the place. That is the basics. You simply pass it like the statistic name, the ID possibly of which one you're tracking or hitting against when a page view happens, and the system does the rest. Conversion is slightly different when you use the log conversion method, and that is tying back to the campaigns and conversions tracking of the online marketing solution as opposed to the standard web analytics tracking. So if you remember in the Kentico menu, there's two different places. There's web analytics and then there's campaigns and conversions. And basically those two API calls will track statistics and add to the correct places in the system from those two activities. And a frequent use of log conversions might be on like a button that you have in your page that you maybe have on a form submit action. You know, you'll see a lot of those web parts like the online form web part. It'll actually give you the ability to say what conversion should this go to and what's the conversion value that you want to place for someone who takes that action or converts. This is how in the API you would do that same thing with log conversions. And that's something that sometimes people get confused upon, the difference between the two, which is why I thought I would bring it up as one of the first things to know when you're using the online marketing API. So those are the two things, conversions and hits. It's very common. Like out of all the other methods in web analytics, those are the two that you'll use the most. So what I did to not only talk about it is come up with a few quick demos today, or we have two demos mainly. This is the first one. I'm gonna dive into it and I'm gonna show you what those things do. And yes, we are gonna look at some code today. I did zoom in on this. I hope it's large enough for everybody to see. But what I've done is I've made two very simple buttons, the create campaign button and the create conversion button. Behind the scenes, there's some very kind of simple sets of code that use the campaign info object and the campaign info provider. Whenever you're working with this API in web analytics, those are you're talking about campaigns. Those are the two things that you have to worry about. And then conversions is very similar. You'll create a conversion, associate it to a campaign, and that's it. So what does that do? I actually have that prepared as well and a test page. And let me make sure this thing is fired up. Those two buttons, they simply interact with the API with the code I just showed you, and I'm going to click the first one, and it immediately worked. It created that campaign. So let me show you the results of that API call. Of course, my screen timed out on me. And when I click that campaign button, you can see that what it did is it filled in all the parameters for me, and it automatically generated the correct month, the day of the first month to the end of this month. And you can see basically this is very true with any parts of the API. As long as you fill in the correct fields in the code, the display name, the code name, you can put a description, a date and time, and set even some more advanced settings in the user interface. I did all that with this code right here. So this is a really just basic example to get us started out with in terms of working with the objects in one of the APIs in Kentico. The next part of the demo really kind of relies on the second step. So when you make a conversion, you need a campaign first, which is why I created that campaign. And then now I'm going to create a conversion. And not only did it create it, it then went through and attached it to the existing campaign that we made in the first button. That again is basically creating the campaign, those sets of code, and then this one I'm looking up the one I just made. You know, anytime you use an info provider, you use the get object syntax. So I'm looking it up by code name and then the current site to get that ID that then ties it into the conversion. So the quick result of that then is when you look at a campaign, here's the conversion and it's associated to the current campaign, as well as you can switch over to just conversions and hit your list of conversions. That's the new conversion example I just made, and you can see that, you know, there's an example only. It matches up exactly with this text right here. So again, anything you do with the Kentico user interface, you can do through the API, and this is a kind of a not well-known aspect of the API, so I thought I'd show that as a very simple example to get started. Now, let me switch back to the presentation. And I'm going to go from there. Come on, PowerPoint. Okay. One other thing about analytics is this is a kind of a, also not a well-known aspect. You can create your own analytics. You can make your own metrics that track maybe things like emails sent per month or new user signups per week, month, year, or day. You know, that anything that you want to track with this API, you can add into the system. You don't have to worrying about the SQL tables or the storage or how to do it. You use those same API calls that I showed. You know, you might use a slightly different one to make the metric or add to the metric, but you would use log hit or you'd use log conversion, and then you could make a custom report all the way since Kentico 4, I think. It might have been in 3, but I can't quite remember that far back. That allows you to generate a report like this, and you can use that to maybe go to your marketing team with another set of metrics and reports for how your website's behaving. So most people don't know that you can create custom reports and subscribe to them in Kentico through the web analytics tool, and that's why I thought I would bring it up today. So let me know if you think that's interesting, or if you want to know more about it. There's a link to the Kentico documentation at the bottom of the slide as well for how to do that. It's kind of a long help document, I'll be honest with you, but don't worry, it makes it seem harder than it is. It's actually pretty easy to make a custom report. So that's it for web analytics. We're going to move on to some more interesting stuff, in my opinion. And the next building block of the feature set of Kentico's online marketing solution is activity tracking. Activity tracking allows you to get kind of a deep level of insight into the behavior that your website visitors are taking on the site. And things like page views, file downloads, adding products to a shopping cart, signing up for a newsletter, or unsubscribing for a newsletter. You know, it's similar to web analytics, but it's a little bit different, and it's a little bit more micro-based. And it's not just what's shown, which is what I consider web analytics in my head, of like what's viewed on the site. Activity tracking is what's happening or what's being done on the site. You know, whether or not someone's clicking add to wish list from a product detail page, add to shopping cart, share with a friend, you know, that type of activity is also built into Kentico in this activity tracking module. And this is one of my favorite parts of the system, actually, because you can do a lot of things. So in case you haven't used it, here's a screenshot of kind of what it looks like in Kentico. You basically get a nice tracking history of each type of activity, what contact took that activity, what IP address they're coming from, what time they took it, and this basically builds all the time as activities happening on your site. And you can see, you know, I'm looking at a short window of a couple minutes here, and I have this much activity. When you have a very large website, you get a lot of data, and this becomes very powerful because you can see what path someone took through your website. And if they're a registered user, you can even tie that back to their user account, and again, use that for personalization, use it for lead scoring, use it for email marketing, drip marketing campaigns. So there's a lot of things you can do with this activity tracking. And the activity tracking in the box, I think it comes with 27 different types of activities. We see 2 on this screenshot, a page visit and a landing page, but there's the things I've talked about, like file download, add product to shopping cart, add to wish list, forum post, blog post, comment, newsletter subscribe. There's all of the standard things that Kentico does kind of boils into 27 different activities. But what I wanted to show you today is, what if you need to customize an activity type? What if you want to do something else? And the next slide kind of leads into that. There is a simple API, and I'm not going to demo this one, I'm just going to show it to you, but basically the same pattern is followed with what I've shown you with the creating campaigns and conversions. You do the same thing with activity info. And an activity info class represents one line in the previous screenshot of activity. You can tie it to what contact did that activity, what the title of it is, which site it relates to, where it came from a referrer standpoint, and then the type. So what I've done here is I've made a custom type called discuss comment. And if you've used the discuss comment system, you know it's a JavaScript-based commenting system that does a really good job of preventing spam and builds community and allows people to log in with their social media accounts as opposed to having to create another account. So I wanted to track that as part of the server-side activity. And Kentico doesn't do that out of the box because they don't know about a third-party service that they don't control. So this code is all it takes to basically add in a new activity record and then track it with a conversion. Because when someone makes a blog post comment on my blog, I treat that as a conversion. That's a good thing. I want to know about that. So I don't treat it as just a log hit, I treat it as a conversion. And you can see it's like, I don't know, 20 lines of code. It's not very hard to do this. Basically, the only thing that you need to worry about is putting it in the right place, which you can do on the page or the JavaScript call to a web service that runs that behind-the-scenes code. And here's the result. When I fire that code, I basically get a new activity record, and the type and the title shows up, and some really interesting information about where they came from, what time it happened, and you can do a lead score on this. So activity tracking is pretty neat, and to be able to add to the system, I thought that was beneficial. And again, I have a blog post on how to do this from a full walkthrough standpoint. The link there is at the bottom of the slide. So from an activity tracking standpoint, that's really the only kind of custom thing you might do, because again, it has so many built-in activity types. There's not a ton of reason to add more, but this is the primary thing that you would do from an activity tracking standpoint. Up next, marketing automation. One of my favorite parts of the system. It actually allows you to then use those two building blocks we started with, analytics and activity tracking, and do certain automated tasks that maybe a marketing person would have to do manually. And Kentico is very powerful here. There's a lot of things you can do, and you don't even need to be a developer to do it. There's a drag and drop interface for setting up things like a drip marketing campaign or certain event registration or a customer feedback survey. There's lots of different ways that marketing automation can help you grow your website conversions or visitors or whatever your goal is for your website. I definitely recommend checking it out if you're not using it yet. And this is a basic screenshot of the automation designer. Basically, when you go into Kentico and you hit marketing automation, you have the ability to have a process, and a process can be triggered on many different things in the system, whether or not the user just signed up, whether the user visited 3 or 4 pages in a row that were part of your funnel, you know, whether a user bought a product online from your e-commerce part of your Kentico site, and then maybe you want to send them an email afterwards thanking them and maybe giving them a 10% off coupon for the next visit. That's what marketing automation can do, and it does come with many built-in actions, and that's what the top part of the screenshot shows. There's standard actions, conditional, multi-choice, first win. But what do you do if you want to make your own? You know, for basically, one of the first things that we look at is maybe integrating with another system or pushing this data to another part of your system that's internal to Kentico. And there's other action steps that I can't show you in this just the screenshot, but things like importing leads to Salesforce. That's out of the box with Kentico. Things like updating your newsletter subscription based off another action in the system. That's also there. But what I'm going to show you is how to add in a custom action. So in the middle of this screenshot, I have a custom action set up, and this actually takes the contact that runs through this process and inserts them into Zoho CRM. You can put any other CRM you want. You don't know what Zoho is, but basically the goal of this presentation is to illustrate you how to do this. How do I make that box show up that's a custom step or action. And again, I'm going to show you some code. There's two primary ways you could do this. One is to use what's called a contact automation action as your base class and register it again as a custom class using that assembly register attribute on top of your C# file. And basically what this type of action or code is giving you is as I'm going to go back, as the contact runs from start to Zoho, you typically want to know which contact you're dealing with. So grabbing their email address or their name to put it in an email newsletter, that's what I mean by contact automation action. It gives you a link to the contact that's running through the process, and then you can use that data in your code, like .first name, .country, .company name, .job title. That gives you that link to use it in the action. And as long as you register the custom class as the right type, it then shows up to be used when you say add new action. And it's a very standard way that you would add anything into Kentico. As long as it's registered, that's all it takes to do it. And then there's some more sample code. Again, I have a blog post that goes over this. So if you want to see the full sample, go ahead and click the link. It'll get you there. But there's a second way that allows you to add custom actions, and that is the automation action itself. So it's very close to the first one, but this one doesn't give you the link to the contact. It's meant for more just a general action that you want to take or general part of code that you want to take. And maybe if you want to log something out to the event log, or you want to automatically create a file in the file system when somebody registers or something like that, that's where this type of an action makes more sense. Again, it's the very same thing. It's just a slightly different base class that you inherit from and then use it. And check out the link in my blog if you want to see more about the contact actions. But this code is what will get you the ability to have custom marketing automation process steps. But how do we start those steps? That comes back to the trigger. And in the marketing automation platform, there are many built-in types of triggers to the system, like a user bought something, now trigger this process to happen next, or a user filled out an online form, trigger that to automatically subscribe them to a newsletter. The trigger is what's the starting event in the system. And the triggers is pretty basic in Kentico. It doesn't always give you everything you need. It does a lot, don't get me wrong, but if you want to do something special, if you want to inject more data into the marketing automation process, like maybe in the example of when I submit an online form, I have 5 or 6 fields in that form, and I want to take those fields and use it in the email that I send someone, or use it to do something else. Maybe they check the box, I agree to terms and conditions, or I agree that send me monthly marketing updates. And if they didn't check that box, you don't want to do something special. So that's where a trigger handler comes in play. And this is an example of some code that allows you to load up and associate a trigger handler to your system, and then allows you to inject that checkbox of information into your process or your step in your marketing automation. So 2 links at the bottom. They show you more about that. They give you full details. So I'm going to kind of skip by this one, but most people don't know that you can do this. So this is a good example of some API that's not well known and allows you to even take the system to the next level in terms of marketing automation. So I definitely tell people to use it. So that's it on marketing automation. The next kind of building block that covers all of the aspects of online marketing I want to talk about are macros. Kentico has a whole lot of macros. And if you're in the room with me, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you've used a Kentico macro. And if you're virtually listening, go ahead, raise your hand anyways. There are tons of uses of macros in Kentico, not just for online marketing, but for the whole system in general. And actually, it's kind of like the glue that holds the entire platform together when you want to do something dynamic in Kentico. And macros are usually recognized by anywhere you see that curly bracket %sign. Inside of that macro is, telling the system to do something special or dynamic here. So in the online marketing realm, there are a lot of macros to use that save you time from having to write C# or K# yourself. And there's another important aspect of these macros that they take into account all the parts of the system. They take into account the preview mode, because Kentico, if you're used to the persona aspect of Kentico, you can preview a page as a persona. So if I wanted to take my persona here of Billy, who's a rebel and likes drugs and rock and roll, and maybe market to him with a special T-shirt that says something that I can't repeat on air, that personalizing that page or that recommended T-shirt to him can simply be done by calling a macro in your where condition of get persona, or the one at the bottom of persona document where condition. So you don't have to write things like find my contact, look up the persona it's in, are they active on the site, are they in preview mode or live site mode. That all is handled in these 3 or 4 built-in macros for you. And again, most people kind of overlook this part of the macro context. So I'm bringing it up just to illustrate that you can work with the personas in the system very easily using some standard macros, because everybody's very familiar with like the get document URL macro or the shopping cart items macro, but they're not as familiar with some of these online marketing ones. So that's why I'm showing them. And it's very simple. It's not a whole lot different. You just can use your personas or your contact groups however you want in these examples. So I hope that makes sense. If you have questions on that, definitely ask me at the end. Another part of macros are the lead scoring system. And anytime you want to take an action that depends on the score, like you maybe want to wait until a contact gains a score of 100 points or 20 points or 5 points, and then send your sales team an email that's automated, this is the macro you can use to do that. So I have 4 scores defined in one of the sites I was using for the presentation, and basically they each have their own way of calculating points. You get a couple points if you click the link, you get 5 points if you filled out an online form, and the points start to build up per contact. So if you want to tell someone, hey, you've reached gold member status because you have this score, you simply would be able to use the get score macro for the current contact on your page, and it would return you the integer of that score to maybe use in a conditional statement for like show gold member versus silver member. So the scoring aspect is kind of built into the macro system, and really this is a wrapper around the API, which is why I'm going into macros, because they do kind of line up one-to-one sometimes. But it's pretty beneficial. It's pretty easy to use. And there's a lot of other useful macros. I'm not going to go through all of them because we don't have time today, but I do want to point out a few. The orders macro of a contact, the last activity type, and the first activity type are one of the more, or 3 of the more common uses of macros when you get into the online marketing realm. You might want to know what the last time is they submitted a form, or the first time they submitted a form, and then take further action in your code from that, or in your web part, or in your static HTML use of the macro. So it took me a while to kind of actually figure this out when I was doing another project for another client, and it turned out that I was trying to look at writing my own code to do all this when last activity of type form submission was already in there. So I'm kind of pointing these out. If you want to know more about other useful macros, there's the link at the bottom of the slide that goes to the full list. And there's a lot you can do. But I will caveat that last one of anytime that you're working with a collection of orders, be very careful that you're not bogging down the system. If that's not orders and it's instead like accounts or related contacts or something like that, there's a lot of overhead to spinning through each one of those things to figure out what the order total price is. But there's simple uses and advanced uses, and that's actually a good segue into the next point I want to make, which is about high volume. And this is still related to macros and API, but I'm going to switch gears a little bit to segmentation, the feature in Kentico Online Marketing that allows you to put contacts into groups based off a score or based off a condition. And this is something that's very important to many people who develop Kentico sites, because most marketing teams want to be able to work off a group of contacts or a group of scored contacts. And they know that if you have high volume, and I do mean tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of contacts, maybe even a million, I don't know if I'd go to a million, but not just a couple is what I'm trying to say. And you set up a group that's conditional, that needs to be able to group all these contacts together, it tends to be a little slow if you use the out-of-the-box method. And it can cause a lot of problems if you schedule a rebuild of all your contact groups at the same time, all at midnight, because it's a long-running process. And it actually can take a very, very long time, and it can negatively impact performance at a very high level. So what do we do in this situation? How do we make this better? How do we make this faster? Well, luckily, that is where Kentico 8.2 comes in. And to illustrate this issue, because it's kind of a hard issue to just talk about, I've created a little demo. This is a little preview of the demo. But it's NFL season, and I'm a Detroit Lions fan. Sorry, I'm just going to go there. Basically, I've created a quick setup that segments contacts of my website into Green Bay Packers fans, Detroit Lions fans, and Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Obviously, the Detroit Lions fans are the best. And this actual issue, if I've loaded up 100,000 contacts or 10,000 contacts, and I want to segment them based off, are they a Green Bay Packers fan, that's going to take a while. And Kentico 8.2 actually even tells us that. It says the macro condition you're trying to use to optimize is not optimized. And there's a nice helpful link to what can I do to make this faster. Yeah, this points out the problem. If I have to run through and iterate 10,000 or 100,000 contacts one at a time, of course it's going to take some time. And what do we do about that? Luckily, Kentico 8.2 added something called a macro rule translator. And as long as you do it in a little bit better way, using a standard macro rule and then translating it to not go one at a time through each contact, but instead look at all of them in one shot in a much more efficient way, that's the goal. That's what this new technology in Kentico 8.2 gives you. So I'm going to actually show you that by defining a macro rule of a standard, contact is Detroit Lions fan, and use it in the designer, and not by doing it in code in one-off scenarios. This can go much, much faster. So I have that prepared. I'm going to do a quick demo of that. And before I do, I want to show you the one or two things that you have to kind of load up to make your macro rules more optimized in Kentico 8.2. The first one has to do with the standard module loader. I've made basically a module loader that it does very small amount of work in the init of that loader, and it takes the rule metadata, new object, says for this rule that again matches the let me go back to that matches the code name of the rule here, and says translate for no activities and only when certain attributes are changed, and run this rule. And basically the new instantiation of the Detroit Lions fan instance translator class is the next class I'll show you, but that's the thing that links it together, that says anytime I'm evaluating this macro rule, don't go one at a time and go through things. Instead, run this class. And that class is actually illustrated right here. Again, very simple, less than like 20 lines of code. And it just says, make sure I'm running the is Detroit Lions fan instance rule or macro rule. If I am, check if I'm saying is or is not a Detroit Lions fan. And then one line of code to say, get me all of the contacts from the contact info provider where this field is true. So it's using SQL to do the work. It's not using code, it's not going one at a time, it's executing a single SQL statement. And instead of doing 10,000 or 100,000 lookups, we're doing one. Obviously that's going to be much more efficient. So to show you that, and you know what, I should have turned off the screen lock feature because it keeps locking me out. I'm going to go to Contact Management, and I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to Contact Groups. Well, actually, first I'll show you something. To really just kind of illustrate the scenario, each of my contacts I loaded up a couple thousand contacts with the contact import feature, and I made 3 custom fields. Are they a Lions fan, which everybody should be a Lions fan at this point, or are they Green Bay or Pittsburgh? So a few of these things are checked or not checked, and I've then created a nice contact group if I can type, to be able to market to just Lions fans or Green Bay Packers fans, or personalize my website to just Lions fans or Green Bay Packers fans. So if you look at, oops, I clicked the wrong one. If you looked at the Green Bay Packers, again, that's that screenshot that says, if we're only grabbing the field one at a time, and we're doing that because we're using just code in the macro condition, it's going to do it one at a time, and Kentico is going to say, oh, this is really slow, you should optimize it. By the way, out of all the people who are in my database, only one person is a Green Bay Packers fan, so sorry, Green Bay Packers fans. But, well, actually, yeah, let me show you this. If you then click Rebuild, behind the scenes, it's going to run through, it's going to try to track every one of those fields and then rebuild it to one at a time lookups. And it takes a while. Not too long because I'm running localhost, but imagine if there's hundreds of thousands of contacts, that would have taken longer. But my Detroit Lions fans, I don't get that. I don't get that problem. I get the fact that, you know what, the rule matches because I'm using the macro condition of contact is Detroit Lions fan. It's a named macro. It's not code, so it knows how to optimize it. And out of all my people, 540 contacts are there. 80% of my fan base is Lions fans, as they should be, maybe even higher. And it runs that code one time. It's a lot faster. So it's actually pretty cool. So the result is kind of what I just showed you, that the Lions fan contact group builds much faster, it runs faster. And here's to prove it. If you ever need to look at what's happening in the macro world, use the macro debug system, and it tells you what things are running at what point. So I ran that macro condition group button before the presentation. I took a screenshot of the results. And the results show that there's only 6 mentions of the rule Detroit Lions fan. And really, it took less than 0.001 seconds to run one time when I ran my rebuild for the Lions fan group. So pay attention to that a second and think of that. It ran one time, less than 0.001 second. When I did the Green Bay example, it's a lot worse, a lot worse. That's why I'm saying, ouch. You know, this macro debugger shows that that macro ran 1,360 times for all the contacts, and if you look, each one was like 0.06 or 0.07 to do the single select statement to look all those up one at a time. So we can either run the query once, we can run it 1,300 times. Which one do you think is going to run faster? I mean, it's pretty obvious. And I hope I've shown that you can optimize these things in a pretty easy way. So what does that mean? It means that obviously the Lions are way better than the Packers, as they should be in my world. I just thought that it was kind of a funny picture that that's Nick Fairley, I believe, from the Lions. He's no longer with the team, but hey, you know, he's crunching Aaron Rodgers anyway. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that that example worked out for you. So we're kind of near the end of the things, and that's where I wanted to remind you of the goals of the presentation. I want to show you a little bit about the online marketing API. I want to show you how to work within the framework, and then some optimization tips are what I kind of ended with. There's a lot more I could go into, and remember, there's a lot of different ways that you could do this in Kentico. Some that work better than others. The system, for the most part, works very well in all uses, but you have to be a little careful when you're dealing with high volume amounts of things in the context in the API. But hopefully, these are the 3 goals that you kind of learned today. So with that, we're kind of near the end. So I'm going to open up for a few minutes to questions, and I'm hoping we get a few questions. So let me check out where we're at with that. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? Apparently not. So apparently you're all asleep, and I haven't given you any knowledge, but hopefully you've learned a little bit today. All right, well, if you have questions, you know, feel free to contact me. I'll show you my contact at the end, and I'm going to go on to a few more things. One thing that the Kentico User Group asked me to do is to point out that there is another Kentico User Group coming up. It's on September 16th. It's hosted and presented by Avistone Technologies. So definitely, if you found today's webinar useful, feel free to, you know, sign up for that next one. I know I'll be paying attention to it, and I'll try to listen as best I can. I would like to say thank you once again to the Kentico User Group and to HiMonkey and to Joel for setting all this up. Hope you found some valuable tips today, learned a little bit about the online marketing API. But with that, here's my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about what you saw today. Definitely hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. Email me. Check out my blog at mcbeeve.com, where I talk about Kentico tips, tricks, and best practices. And really, unless there's any other questions, I'm going to give it a few more seconds for questions. I do not see any, so I guess with that, Joel asked me to just wrap up the webinar. I'm going to give you 10 minutes back in your day. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and until you see me next time, that's all.
Hey, Brian. Hang on. This
Go ahead,
is
Joel.
There was a question besides the one about how many Super Bowls the Lions had won, which I'm not sure if you can answer that one. There's another one here.
Zero.
Okay. From Kevin, it says, let's see. How valuable is it to register custom classes? Oh, shoot. It's weird. I can't read the whole thing. It says, I have a question. How value is registering custom classes help in version migration?
Okay. So what I would say to that is, if you don't register the custom class, Kentico won't pick it up in the user interface. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because your code will still run, as long as it compiles, of course. But you're just kind of losing some of the ability to tie it to an object in the system. Like when I showed you those actions in the marketing automation process, it's a required field to tell that action what class to use behind the scenes. So if you don't register it and you aren't able to pick it up when you say new action type in the system, it won't execute, and you won't even be able to save that step. So it's kind of, you have to register them to be able to use it in the user interface. If it's all behind the scenes, just automated code, you don't necessarily need to register it. I think it's still a best practice to register it. But from an upgrade or a version standpoint, this is kind of something new that's with Kentico 8. And there were other ways to do it in 7, 6, and 5 that are slightly different. So I don't expect them to change that in Kentico 9. I mean, I can't totally speak to Kentico 9 because I don't have it yet in the full glory of the new version. But for the most part, it should be version safe. There shouldn't be a big concern, because I know they're going to support it going forward, because it's a major foundational part of the system.
Looks like
Any other thing you have there, Joel?
Yeah, let me look here. It says, how long does a typical version migration take? Is 8 to 8.2 versus to 9?
Okay, good question. So luckily, 8 to 8.2 is pretty simple. I do tell people it's a recommended approach to go 8 to 8.1 and then 8.1 to 8.2, because you're getting all of the required packages updated along the way. And they're smaller upgrades. They're more like hot fixes in terms of what they change and what they add. I mean, they do add some big new features in a point upgrade versus a hot fix, but it's not like they're completely changing the system the way they did from 7 to 8, or they might do from 8 to 9. I tell people that if you're doing a major upgrade, a point upgrade, it's going to take a while, and you better do it on dev, and you better make sure it's a repeatable process, and you better test everything in the system. I still recommend upgrading 8.1 or 2 in dev and testing, but it's not a big thing. So I would say it's a tenth of the project size as compared to a major upgrade from 7 to 8 or 8 to 9. Anything else?
So there's a note here from Brian Zoltis about the public webinar on 9/18 about upgrading best practices, with the blog that we publish next Monday. With a registration link, yeah.
Yeah, we'll make sure to tell Brian Zoltis to, not speak up too often, because he likes to talk a lot. Take that opportunity to take a shot at him. But Brian is the technical evangelist for Kentico, and yeah, he kind of knows a little bit more on the roadmap of where things are going. That will be a good blog. I'm sure most people are very concerned with the upgrade process as a whole because it was kind of a harder thing to go from 7 to 8. I think the 8 to 9 will be easier, but definitely check out the post on DevNet. Like you said, it's coming out soon. There'll probably be a webinar on it.
Yep, it is a webinar.
That reminds me that if you're in either Chicago or Denver in the very near future, I will do one pitch for the Kentico Developer Roadshow. In fact, it's the 25th, I think next week in Chicago. Check out Brian's post about the Developer Roadshow and what that means. It's like a 6 to 8 p.m. event in Chicago at the Microsoft office. I will be there. Brian will be there. I think 20 other developers or so are showing up, and we're going to talk about a few different topics. And then the Denver one is, man, I don't know the date, so I won't say it, but it's at least about a week or so after. And if you're a Kentico developer, you want to learn about the API, you want to ask questions, Brian is a great resource to do that from. And join us in Chicago or definitely attend Denver. So hit the Developer Roadshow.
Yeah, and Brian said there's a link to the webinar in the blog post, and the Denver event is the 27th. So a week from Thursday. Yep.
There we go. There we go. Good. All right. I think that's all then.
I believe so. Thank you, Brian.
All right. Well, I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, guys, for hosting, and we will talk to you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.